What if the most extraordinary stories aren't found in books, but at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, in a vast, silent Arizona desert? One particular stop has become legendary for the outlandish, sometimes terrifying, and often inexplicable encounters shared by its diverse patrons. Are you ready to hear the tales that defy belief? My name is Jake Morrison, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew what normal looked like. Fresh out of college with a degree in petroleum engineering that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, I found myself desperate for any job that would pay the bills. When I saw the listing for a night shift attendant at Crossroads Station, 70 miles outside of Phoenix on Route 191, I didn't hesitate. The pay was surprisingly good. Too good, I should have realized. And they promised full benefits after just 30 days. The first red flag should have been the interview process. Most gas stations barely glance at your application before handing you a uniform. But Crossroads Station required 3 phone interviews, a background check, and a psychological evaluation. The manager, an elderly man named Raymond Blackwood, spoke in measured tones that made every question sound like a test I might fail. "Can you handle isolation, Jake?" he asked during our final call. I mean true isolation. Hours passing where you won't see another soul, where the silence becomes so complete you'll hear your own heartbeat like thunder. I assured him I could. I'd spent summers working at my uncle's ranch, knew how quiet the desert could get. But as I discovered that first night in October, there's a difference between quiet and the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums like a living thing. Crossroads Station sits at the intersection of Route 191 and an unnamed dirt road that stretches into the darkness like a question mark. The building itself is unremarkable. Single story, painted white with blue trim. 3 gas pumps out front that look like they haven't been updated since the 1980s. But there's something about its positioning that feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. It's perfectly centered at the crossroads, with the desert stretching endlessly in all 4 directions. My first shift began at midnight on October 15th. Raymond met me there to go over the basics. How to work the ancient cash register, where the bathroom key was kept, how to manually operate the pumps if the power went out. Standard stuff, until he handed me a laminated sheet of paper. The rules, he said simply. Memorize them. Follow them exactly. No exceptions, no interpretations, no creative thinking. These rules have kept this place running for 47 years. I glanced down at the list, expecting the usual corporate policies about checking IDs for cigarettes and not leaving the register unattended. What I found instead made my skin crawl. Crossroads Station night shift rules follow exactly, no exceptions. 1. Never acknowledge customers who enter after 3 a.m. wearing all white clothing. 2. If someone asks for directions to the old place, give them bottled water and tell them to turn around. 3. The lottery machine will occasionally print tickets on its own. Tear them up immediately and burn them in the metal trash can outside. 4. If you hear knocking from inside the walk-in cooler, do not open it until sunrise. 5. Customers who pay with coins that feel warm to the touch should be given their change in bills only. 6. Never look directly at customers who cast no reflection in the security mirrors. 7. If the payphone rings between 2 to 4 a.m., let it ring exactly 7 times. Then answer by saying, "Crossroads Station, we're closed." Hang up immediately. 8. Any customer who asks for the usual but you don't recognize should be sold a single pack of Marlboro Reds and told to drive safe. 9. Keep the religious pamphlets under the counter. You'll know when to offer them. 10. If all the lights in the station flicker 3 times in succession, lock the front door and wait in the back office until sunrise. I read through the list twice, certain it was some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. You're joking, right? Raymond's expression didn't change. Have I been laughing, Jake? These are insane. What kind of gas station? The kind that's been serving travelers for nearly half a century without a single robbery, assault, or unexplained disappearance of staff. He fixed me with a stare that made me feel like he could see straight through me. The kind that pays you 3 times minimum wage to follow simple instructions. I wanted to walk away. Every rational fiber in my being screamed that this was wrong, that normal jobs didn't come with rules about reflectionless customers and warm coins. But my bank account had other ideas, and the memory of my landlord's threats about next month's rent made the decision for me. I'll follow them, I said. Good. One more thing. Raymond pulled out an old flip phone, the kind that had been obsolete for over a decade. This stays with you at all times during your shift. If something happens that the rules don't cover, call the number programmed into it. But Jake, he paused at the door. Pray you never have to make that call. The first few hours passed normally enough. A trucker stopped around 12:30 for coffee and diesel fuel, paying with a credit card and complaining about construction delays near Tucson. A young couple in a rental car pulled up around 1:15, the woman visibly pregnant, asking for directions to the nearest hospital. I gave them clear instructions to Phoenix Memorial and watched their taillights disappear into the darkness. At 2:47 a.m., everything changed. I was restocking the candy aisle when I heard the bell above the door chime. Turning around, I saw a man in his 60s wearing a pristine white suit, white shoes, and a white hat that looked like it belonged in a 1940s movie. His skin was pale as milk, and when he smiled, his teeth gleamed like polished ivory. Rule number 1 echoed in my mind. Never acknowledge customers who enter after 3 a.m. wearing all-white clothing. The man walked slowly through the store, his footsteps making no sound on the linoleum floor. He picked up a candy bar, examined it for a full minute, then set it down in the wrong spot. He did this with item after item: a bag of chips, a magazine, a travel-sized bottle of aspirin. Each time, he'd hold the object like he'd never seen anything like it before. I forced myself to keep stocking candy, to act like he wasn't there. But I could feel his attention like a weight on my shoulders. In my peripheral vision, I saw him approach the counter. He stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, breathing softly through his nose. Then he spoke, and his voice sounded like wind through dry grass. "Excuse me, son." I kept my eyes on the Snickers bars in my hands, arranging and rearranging them with unnecessary precision. "Son, I'm talking to you." My hands began to shake. The rule was clear: never acknowledge them. But every instinct I'd been raised with screamed that ignoring a customer was wrong, that I'd lose my job. "I can see you there, behind the counter. I know you can hear me." The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the windows. The man's voice took on an edge of irritation. "This is very rude behavior, young man. I simply want to purchase some items." I closed my eyes and recited my social security number in my head, anything to focus on something other than his voice. When I opened them again, he was gone. The store's temperature had returned to normal, and the only evidence of his visit was a $20 bill on the counter. Crisp and new, but somehow wrong. The serial numbers were all zeros, and Andrew Jackson's face looked like it was screaming. I swept the bill into the trash and spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound, every shadow that moved in the desert wind. By sunrise, I convinced myself it had been a stress-induced hallucination, that the isolation and weird rules had gotten to my head faster than I'd expected. But as I was preparing to leave, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the dust outside the front door, there were footprints. Perfectly preserved impressions of dress shoes, leading from the parking area to the entrance. But there were no prints leading away. It was as if whoever had left them had simply vanished in a thin air. I called Raymond from my car, my voice shaking as I described what had happened. He listened without interruption, then said simply, "You follow the rules." "Good. See you tomorrow night." But what was that thing? What did it want? Questions like that will drive you mad, Jake. Focus on what matters. You did your job. You're alive, and the station is secure. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. As I drove home through the growing dawn light, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in white following me. The desert looked different somehow, less empty and more watchful. Every rock formation could have been hiding something. Every distant mountain peak could have been observing my passage. That afternoon, I called 3 other gas stations in the area, asking if they had any openings. None did. I browsed job websites until my eyes burned, but nothing else paid even close to what Crossroads offered. Like it or not, I was trapped, at least until I could find something else. But deep down, beneath the fear and rational protests, something darker had awakened. A curiosity about what else might walk through those doors, what other rules I might witness in action. The man in white had been terrifying, but he'd also been the most interesting thing to happen to me in months. As I lay in bed that day, trying to sleep before my next shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that my real education was just beginning. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want it to stop. My second night at Crossroads Station began with a lesson in the power of silence. The desert has its own rhythm after dark. Not the absence of sound, but a symphony of subtle noises that you only notice when you're truly alone. The hum of fluorescent lights, the tick of the ancient wall clock, the whisper of sand against glass when the wind picks up. After the incident with the man in white, these sounds had become my anchors to reality. Raymond had left me a note on the counter. Trust the rules. Trust yourself. Never trust what you think you understand. Cryptic as always. But I was beginning to appreciate his economy with words. In a place like Crossroads, too much explanation could be worse than too little. The first customer of the night arrived at 12:15 a.m., a woman in her 40s driving a motorcycle that looked like it had seen better decades. Her leather jacket was faded and patched, her boots worn smooth by countless miles of asphalt. She bought a cup of coffee and a pack of cigarettes, paying with exact change and making small talk about the weather. Normal. Blessedly, completely normal. You're new, she observed, not a question, but a statement. Second night, I admitted. She nodded knowingly. This place has a way of testing people. Some pass, some don't. The ones who don't, she shrugged, leaving the sentence hanging like smoke in still air. What happens to them? They find other jobs, usually real quick. She pocketed her cigarettes and headed for the door, then paused. Bit of advice, kid. When you start seeing patterns in the strangeness, that's when you need to be most careful. The desert doesn't like being figured out. After she left, I found myself studying the rules more carefully, looking for connections I might have missed. Some seemed straightforward enough. Don't acknowledge certain customers. Don't open the cooler when something knocks from inside. Others felt more like remnants of local superstition. But Rule 7 about the payphone had me puzzled. Who used payphones anymore? As if summoned by my thoughts, the old rotary phone mounted on the wall began to ring at exactly 2 a.m. My heart hammered as I counted the rings. 1, 2, 3. The sound was harsh and metallic, nothing like modern phone tones. 4, 5, 6. I reached for the handset, just as it completed the 7th ring. Crossroads Station, we're closed, I said quickly, then hung up. The silence that followed felt different than before, expectant, like the desert itself was holding its breath. I waited for something to happen, for some consequence of my actions, but nothing came. Just the return of familiar sounds and the gradual easing of tension in my shoulders. At 2:30 a.m., a pickup truck pulled up to pump number 2. The driver was a man in his 30s wearing a baseball cap and work clothes. Normal enough until he walked into the store. His reflection in the security mirrors was wrong. Not absent like Rule 6 warned about, but delayed, like his image was struggling to keep up with his actual movements. He wandered the aisles for several minutes, occasionally picking up items and examining them with the same alien curiosity I'd witnessed the night before. When he approached the counter with an energy drink and a bag of jerky, I kept my eyes fixed on the register screen. "Quiet night," he said conversationally. I rang up his purchases without responding, focusing on the numbers on the display. His total came to $8.47, and he paid with a $10 bill that felt warm against my fingers. The heat spread up my arms like fever, and I quickly gave him his change in singles from the register. "Drive safe," I managed to say, though the words felt thick and strange in my mouth. He smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes, and walked out. In the security mirror, his reflection lingered for a full 3 seconds after he'd left the store. The third customer of the night tested my resolve in ways I hadn't expected. She entered at 3:17 a.m., an elderly woman wearing a faded floral dress and carrying a purse that looked older than I was. Her hair was silver white and perfectly styled, and she moved with the careful dignity of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Excuse me, dear," she said in a voice like honey over gravel. "I'm looking for directions to the old place. Do you know how I might get there?" Rule number 2 blazed across my mind. If someone asks for directions to the old place, give them bottled water and tell them to turn around. I grabbed 2 bottles of water from the cooler and set them on the counter. "Ma'am, I think you need to turn around. Go back the way you came." Her expression shifted, revealing something sharp and hungry beneath the grandmotherly facade. "Young man, I've been driving for 3 days. I'm tired, I'm lost, and I need directions to the old place. Surely you can help me." "The water's on the house," I said, pushing the bottles toward her. "But you need to turn around." For a moment, her face seemed to flicker, like a television changing channels. In that instant, I saw something else looking out through her eyes, something ancient and patient and thoroughly inhuman. Then the moment passed, and she was just a confused old woman again. "Well," she said stiffly, "I suppose customer service isn't what it used to be." She took the water bottles and left without another word. Through the window, I watched her climb into a car that hadn't been there when she'd entered. A massive black sedan from the 1950s with fins like shark teeth. The engine made no sound as she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the darkness like dying stars. My hands were shaking as I wrote the incident in the logbook Raymond had left for me. Just the basics, no interpretation or analysis. Time, description, rule followed, outcome. Like a scientific experiment where I was both researcher and subject. The lottery machine incident happened at 4:23 a.m. I was cleaning the coffee station when I heard the mechanical whir of the ticket printer activating. This wasn't unusual. The machine occasionally printed test tickets or error messages. But when I looked over, it was churning out ticket after ticket, each one identical. I grabbed the pile and examined them. Every ticket showed the same numbers: 06-13-21-31-44, Powerball 15. But the dates were wrong. Some showed dates from years in the past, others from decades in the future. One was dated October 32nd, 1847. Another read February 30th, 2087. Following Rule 3, I tore them all up and took the pieces outside to the metal trash can. The paper burned with an unusual blue flame, and for just a moment, I could swear I heard voices in the crackling. Hundreds of voices whispering numbers and languages I didn't recognize. The final incident of the night came just before dawn. I was restocking the snack display when the lights flickered once, twice, then a third time in rapid succession. Rule 10 kicked in automatically. I ran to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and retreated to the back office. The office was a cramped space barely large enough for a desk, filing cabinet, and ancient computer terminal. A small window looked out onto the parking lot, and I positioned myself there to watch for whatever was coming. The sunrise was still an hour away, but the eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of gray. In that pre-dawn twilight, the desert looked like another world entirely. All silver sand and black rock formations that could have been monuments to forgotten gods. That's when I saw them. Figures moved between the gas pumps, at least a dozen of them, all wearing the same flowing white robes. They moved in perfect synchronization, like dancers performing a choreographed routine. One by one, they approached the pumps and appeared to fill containers I couldn't see. No gasoline flowed, no money changed hands, but they went through all the motions of a normal transaction. This continued for nearly 20 minutes. The figures never looked toward the station building, never acknowledged my presence behind the window. They completed their mysterious business and departed as silently as they'd arrived, disappearing into the desert without leaving so much as a footprint in the sand. When the sun finally crested the horizon, I unlocked the front door and ventured outside. The gas pumps showed no record of any transactions during the night. The sand around them was unmarked, but hanging from pump number 3 was a single white feather, longer than my hand and soft as silk. Raymond arrived at 6:30 a.m. sharp, just as he had the morning before. He took one look at my face and nodded approvingly. "You're learning," he said simply. "What were those things?" "The figures in white." "Customers," he replied, which wasn't an answer at all. "You followed the rules. The station is secure, and you're still sane. That's what matters." He handed me my pay envelope, cash, as always, and started his own preparations for the day's shift. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to demand explanations for everything I'd witnessed. But something in his manner discouraged interrogation. This wasn't a place for answers. I was beginning to understand. This was a place for endurance. As I drove home through the desert morning, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror compulsively. Not for pursuit this time, but for signs that the world I was leaving behind was still there. Part of me expected to look back and see nothing but empty desert, as if Crossroad Station existed only during the dark hours, fading with the dawn like a fever dream. But it remained stubbornly real in my mirror, growing smaller but never disappearing entirely. A white speck against the brown landscape, waiting for the next sunset and the customers it would bring. That day, I tried to research the station online. I found nothing. No reviews, no mentions in travel guides, not even a listing in business directories. It was as if the place existed in a blind spot of the modern world, invisible to search engines and GPS systems alike. Yet somehow, people found it. Night after night, travelers pulled off Route 191 and into that circle of fluorescent light, drawn by needs that had nothing to do with gasoline or convenience food. And I was beginning to suspect that I had become part of whatever drew them there. By my 5th night at Crossroads Station, I developed what Raymond called desert eyes, the ability to see the difference between what belonged in the normal world and what decidedly did not. It was a skill born from necessity, because the rules only covered the most obvious violations of reality. Everything else required judgment calls that could mean the difference between going home safely and not going home at all. The station's logbook, I discovered, went back decades. Page after page of entries in different handwriting, documenting encounters that defied explanation. Most were terse, professional notations. 3:15 a.m. Man with no shadow purchased cigarettes. Paid with silver coins dated 1876. Or 2:47 a.m. Woman asked for directions to Chicago. Map showed her location as middle of Lake Michigan. But some entries hinted at deeper mysteries. One from 1987 read, "The Gold Man returned. Knows my name now. Offered to show me the source. Declined as instructed. Note, counting days until replacement arrives. The Gold Man. I've been wondering about him since my first night, when the rules mentioned customers who paid with coins that felt warm to the touch. On my 6th night, I finally met him. He arrived at exactly 1:33 a.m., driving a vehicle I couldn't quite focus on. Every time I tried to look directly at it, my eyes seemed to slide away, like trying to stare at the sun. I had the impression of something large and angular, painted in colors that shouldn't exist. The man himself was easier to see, though no less disturbing. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean and sharp-featured, wearing a suit that looked expensive but outdated, the kind of thing a businessman might have worn in the 1960s. His skin had a golden undertone that seemed to glow with its own light, and his eyes were the color of burnished copper. He moved through the store with purpose, selecting items with the precision of someone following a detailed list. A bag of ice, 3 candy bars, all different flavors, a road atlas from the rack near the magazine display, a small bottle of aspirin. When he approached the counter, he was humming something that might have been a lullaby. "Working late again. I see," he said in a voice like expensive whiskey. "How are you adjusting to our little community?" Our little community. The phrasing made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. "That'll be $23.47, I said, reading the total from the register display. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather pouch that looked older than the building we stood in. From it, he counted out coins, but not the warm ones the rules warned about. These were cold as winter morning, and each one bore the face of a president I didn't recognize on currency that had never existed. "Keep the change," he said, though he'd counted exactly $23.47. "And give my regards to Raymond when you see him. Tell him the offer still stands." After he left, I examined the coins more carefully. The metal was unlike anything I'd seen. Not quite gold, not quite silver, but something that seemed to shift between the two depending on the angle of the light. The faces were familiar but wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate American presidents from memory rather than photographs. I locked the coins in the cash register and made a note in the logbook. But throughout the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been evaluated for something, and I wasn't sure if I'd passed or failed the test. The woman who vanished from the restroom came the next night. She was young, maybe early 20s, with blonde hair and nervous energy that set my teeth on edge. She bought a pack of gum and asked for the restroom key. Nothing unusual there. The bathroom was a single occupancy unit on the side of the building, connected to the main store by a short hallway. She'd been gone for about 10 minutes when I heard the knocking. It came from inside the walk-in cooler, just as Rulfer had warned. Slow, deliberate raps that seemed to echo through the entire building. I checked the clock. 3:47 a.m., well before sunrise. Following the rules, I ignored the sound and went back to my magazine. But the knocking continued, growing more insistent, and underneath it, barely audible, I could hear what might have been a voice calling for help. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The woman still hadn't returned from the restroom, and the knocking from the cooler had developed a rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of a heartbeat. I knocked on the restroom door, called out to ask if she was okay. No response. Finally, I used the master key to open the bathroom door. The room was empty, but the small window above the toilet was open. The screen had been removed from the inside and was lying on the floor, but the window opening was barely large enough for a child to fit through. There was no way a grown woman could have squeezed through it. More disturbing was what I found on the bathroom mirror. Written in what looked like lipstick were the words, "Found the source. Don't look for me." I radioed Raymond using the emergency frequency he'd given me. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for the call. "She's gone," I reported. Bathroom window was open, but there's no way she could have fit through it. And there's a message on the mirror. What does it say? I read him the words exactly. There was a long pause before he responded. "Clean off the message. File a police report in the morning, saying she left on foot and you don't know which direction she went. Don't mention the window or the message. But what really happened to her? Some questions don't have answers you want to live with, Jake. Focus on your job." The knocking from the cooler stopped at 6:15 a.m., exactly at sunrise. When Raymond arrived for the day's shift, he inspected the bathroom without comment, then handed me an envelope containing my weekly pay and a business card for a therapist in Phoenix. "Just in case," he said, "this job can mess with your head if you let it." But it wasn't my head I was worried about. It was the growing certainty that the rules were more than just guidelines. They were a form of protection against things that saw human consciousness as just another resource to be harvested. The hitchhiker arrived on my 10th night, appearing in the parking lot without any vehicle to explain his presence. He was elderly, maybe 70, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been expensive once, but had been worn to shreds by hard traveling. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much and understood too little. "Got any food?" he asked when he entered the store. "Haven't eaten in, well, it's been a while." I sold him a microwave burrito and a cup of coffee, watching as he devoured both with the desperate hunger of genuine starvation. When he finished, he sat on the floor near the magazine rack and seemed to deflate like a balloon losing air. "You're new here," he said. It wasn't a question. "About 2 weeks. I've been coming here for 37 years. Never ages a day. This place never changes." He gestured around the store with one trembling hand. "Sometimes I think it's the only real thing left in the world. Where do you travel from?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Everywhere. Nowhere. Places that don't exist anymore, or maybe never did. You ever hear of a town called Patience, Arizona?" I shook my head. Used to be about 50 miles south of here. Had a main street, a post office, even a small hospital. Population peaked around 1,200 back in the 70s. But if you go looking for it now, you'll find nothing but desert. Not even ruins. It's like the whole place just unraveled. What happened to it? Same thing that happens to most folks who get too curious about this area. They find what they're looking for, and it's more than they can handle. He stood up slowly, bones creaking audibly. But places like Patience, they don't just disappear. They go somewhere else. And the people who live there, well, some of them are still traveling, still looking for the way home. He walked to the door, then paused. "Word of advice, son. When your time here is up, and it will be up sooner than you think, don't go looking for explanations. Don't try to map the territory or catalog the species. Just take your pay and find yourself a nice normal job somewhere far from here." "What if I don't want to leave?" He smiled sadly. "Then you'll become part of what draws others here. And that's not a fate I'd wish on anyone." After he left, I spent the rest of the night researching Patience, Arizona. He was right. No trace of it existed in any official records. But I did find scattered references in old newspaper archives and travel guides. Mentions of a small mining community that had thrived briefly in the 1970s before economic changes forced its closure. The most disturbing find was a 1979 article from the Phoenix Tribune titled "Search Called Off for Missing Town." It described how a family had reported driving through Patience on their way to California, stopping for gas and food, even getting directions from locals. But when they tried to return the same route a week later, they found nothing but empty desert. Search and rescue teams had looked for any trace of the community, but had found only unexplained tire tracks leading into the wilderness. The article quoted the family's teenage daughter. The gas station attendant told us to be careful driving at night. Said there were things in the desert that didn't belong. We thought he was just trying to scare us, but now I wonder if he was trying to warn us about something else entirely. As dawn approached, I found myself staring out at the desert with new eyes. How many other places had simply ceased to exist? How many other travelers had found their way to Crossroads Station, carrying stories of towns and cities that had been erased from maps and memories alike? And most disturbing of all, if places could disappear, what was to stop people from disappearing too? What was to stop me from disappearing if I learned too much or asked the wrong questions? The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the sand near the gas pumps, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, were tire tracks leading away from the station. But these weren't normal tire treads. They were too wide, too deep, and they seemed to glow with a faint phosphorescence that hurt to look at directly. The tracks led into the desert in a perfectly straight line, disappearing into the distance like a highway to somewhere else. And as I watched, a new set appeared, as if an invisible vehicle had just departed, heading toward horizons that might not exist on any earthly map. I made a note in the logbook, keeping my description factual and brief. But privately, I wondered how long it would be before someone noticed that Jake Morrison had stopped coming home from work, stopped answering his phone, stopped existing in any meaningful way, and whether I'd even notice what happened. 3 weeks into my employment at Crossroads Station, I began to notice the patterns. Not in the supernatural occurrences themselves. Those seemed random, chaotic, following no logic I could understand, but in the way the desert responded to human presence. It was as if the landscape itself was aware, patient, and gradually reshaping reality around anyone who spent too much time at the crossroads. The first sign was my apartment in Phoenix. I'd been driving back and forth daily, maintaining the pretense of a normal life outside the station. But each morning, the drive seemed to take a little longer, the familiar landmarks becoming harder to find. What had once been a straight shot down Route 191 was now a maze of side roads and detours that appeared overnight. On Thursday morning of my third week, I arrived at my apartment complex to find my building gone. Not demolished, simply absent, as if it had never existed. In its place was an empty lot where desert grass grew through cracks in an ancient foundation. When I asked the neighbors about the missing building, they looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "There's never been an apartment complex here," insisted Mrs. Chun, who had lived next door for 15 years. "Just that old lot. Sometimes kids play there, but mostly it's empty." I checked my lease agreement, my rental insurance, even my bank records. According to every piece of documentation, I'd been paying rent on an apartment that had never existed. My belongings, clothes, furniture, books, everything that comprised my material life, had simply vanished along with the building that had housed them. That's when I realized the desert had begun its slow digestion of my reality. Raymond found me sitting in my car outside the station that evening, staring at the lease agreement that now showed an address for a building that wasn't there. "It's starting, isn't it?" I said without looking up. "Whatever happened to the others is happening to me." He climbed into the passenger seat, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned not to make sudden movements in a world full of predators. "Tell me about your life before you came here," he said. "Family, friends, plans for the future." I tried to remember, but the memories felt thin, insubstantial, like trying to recall a dream after waking. I had a degree in petroleum engineering. I was looking for work in the industry. I had college friends, but we hadn't talked much since graduation. My parents died in a car accident when I was 20. No siblings, no girlfriend. "Perfect," Raymond said with grim satisfaction. "No deep connections. No one who would really notice if you disappeared." "That's not an accident, Jake. The station doesn't just hire random applicants. It calls to specific types of people. Isolated individuals, loners, people who exist on the margins of society. You're saying it chose me? I'm saying it's been choosing people like you for decades. The question now is whether you're going to fight it or let it happen." He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet and handed it to me. It showed a much younger Raymond standing in front of Crossroads Station, but the building looked identical to how it appeared now. No aging, no wear, as if time moved differently within its walls. "This was taken in 1978, he said. "I was 25 years old, fresh out of college with a geology degree. I applied for a night shift job because I needed money and figured it would be temporary, just until I could find something in my field." "How long have you been here?" 47 years. I've watched the world change around this place, watched highways get rerouted, watched towns disappear, watched entire decades pass while this station remained constant. And I've trained dozens of night shift workers, most of whom lasted less than a month before the desert claimed them. "What makes you different?" Raymond was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening desert. "I learned to stop fighting it, not surrender. That's different. But I stopped trying to understand what couldn't be understood, stopped looking for rational explanations for irrational phenomena. I became part of the station's ecosystem instead of trying to remain separate from it. And the others? The ones who didn't last. Some quit early, before the changes became irreversible. They went back to their normal lives, and probably don't even remember working here. But others, he gestured toward the desert. Others became permanent residents of this region. They're still out there, still serving their purpose, but not in any way they would have chosen. That night, I paid closer attention to the customers who violated the rules. The man who cast no reflection, the woman who asked for directions to places that didn't exist, the figures in white who appeared between gas pumps. I began to see them not as random supernatural encounters, but as former employees who had crossed invisible lines and become something else. The realization hit me when I recognized one of them. At 2:17 a.m., a young woman entered the store wearing all white. White jeans, white sneakers, a white t-shirt that looked like it had never been worn. According to Rule 1, I wasn't supposed to acknowledge her existence, but something about her face nagged at me, a familiarity I couldn't place. She moved through the store with the same alien curiosity I'd observed in other rule-violating customers, examining products like she'd never seen them before. When she picked up a candy bar, she held it to her ear and shook it, as if expecting it to make a sound. She opened a magazine and stared at the pages for several minutes, but held it upside down. Then she approached the counter and spoke in a voice like wind through empty rooms. "Excuse me, do you know what time it is?" I kept my eyes fixed on the inventory sheet I was pretending to read, fighting every instinct that told me to help a customer. But as she stood there waiting for an answer that would never come, I caught sight of her reflection in the security mirror and recognized her immediately. It was the woman from my third night, the one who had vanished from the restroom, the one whose lipstick message had read, "Found the source. Don't look for me." She had found the source, whatever that meant. And in doing so, she had become part of the station's collection of lost souls, doomed to wander the aisles in clothing that would never get dirty, asking questions that would never be answered. After she left, I called Raymond on the emergency phone. "The woman in white," I said. It was her, the one who disappeared from the bathroom. "I know," he said simply. "They all come back eventually. Changed, but recognizable to those who knew them before." What happened to her? What's the source she was looking for? "Jake, you're asking the wrong questions. The issue isn't what happened to her. It's whether you're going to let the same thing happen to you." But I was already past the point of no return, and we both knew it. The desert had begun its work on my reality, erasing the connections that tied me to the normal world. My apartment was gone. My few acquaintances had forgotten me, and even my own memories were becoming unreliable. Soon, I would exist only at Crossroads Station, and the station would exist only for me. The next morning, I tried to contact my college roommate, someone I'd spoken to just a month earlier. His phone number was disconnected, and when I looked him up online, I found no trace of anyone by his name attending my university. It was as if our friendship had been retroactively erased from history. I drove to my old campus, hoping to find some record of my attendance, some proof that I had existed before Crossroads Station. But the registrar's office had no record of a Jake Morrison ever enrolling there. My degree, the piece of paper that had led me to apply for this job in the first place, was nowhere to be found among my possessions. The desert was consuming my past, digesting the evidence of my former life with methodical precision. And each night I returned to work, I felt myself becoming more connected to the station, more attuned to its rhythms and needs. The customers began to seem less strange and more familiar. I found myself anticipating their arrivals, knowing which rules would be triggered before the violations occurred. The man with golden skin became almost friendly, offering small talk about weather patterns and road conditions in places that didn't appear on any map. The figures in white moved with a choreography I was beginning to understand, following patterns that served purposes beyond my comprehension. Most disturbing of all, I began to enjoy the work. The isolation that had once frightened me now felt like protection from a world that had become increasingly unreal. The rules that had seemed arbitrary now made perfect sense as part of a larger system designed to maintain balance between competing forms of existence. And the station itself began to feel less like a workplace and more like home. On my 21st night, I found a new rule taped to the cash register. It was written in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of creating it. Rule 11. When you stop wanting to leave, that's when you need to run. But as I read those words, I realized it was already too late. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with travelers who had once been like me. People looking for temporary work who had found something far more permanent. And somewhere out there, other gas stations waited at other crossroads, staffed by other lost souls who had learned to serve needs that transcended the merely human. I crumpled up the rule and threw in the trash. Then I settled in for another night of work, watching the door for the next customer who would test my understanding of reality. Because that's what I was now. Not an employee, but a custodian of the impossible, a guardian of the threshold between what was and what could be. The station had claimed me, just as it had claimed all the others, and I found myself oddly grateful for the transformation. After all, where else could someone with my particular skills find steady employment? 6 months had passed since my first night at Crossroads Station, though time had become a fluid concept in the desert. Days blended into nights, seasons lost their meaning, and the calendar on the office wall hadn't been changed since 1987. Not because anyone had forgotten, but because it no longer mattered. I had become something new during those months, something that existed primarily in the spaces between normal reality and whatever lay beyond it. My reflection in mirrors was starting to lag behind my movements, and I could feel warmth radiating from coins before customers even reached into their pockets. The station was changing me, just as it had changed all the others who had stayed too long. But unlike my predecessors, I had begun to understand why. The revelation came during a conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a professor of anthropology from Northern Arizona University who arrived one night in February, driving a rental car and carrying research equipment that looked expensive and official. She was in her 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to finding answers to difficult questions. "I'm studying reports of anomalous phenomena along this stretch of highway," she explained, setting up a digital recorder on the counter. Interview subjects have mentioned this station specifically as a focal point for unusual encounters. Would you be willing to discuss your experiences here? I almost laughed. After months of following rules that prohibited normal customer service, here was someone actually asking for information. But something about her manner made me cautious, too eager, too prepared, as if she knew more than she was admitting. "What kind of anomalous phenomena?" I asked. "Disappearances, temporal distortions, reports of buildings, and even entire communities that seem to phase in and out of existence. The geographic center of these incidents appears to be right here." She gestured around the store with professional interest. "How long have you worked at this location?" "Long enough," I said, which wasn't really an answer. "Have you noticed anything unusual about your customers? About the area in general?" I considered the question carefully. The rules didn't specifically prohibit talking to researchers, but they also didn't encourage it. And Dr. Hawthorne's arrival felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. "Define unusual," I said finally. She leaned forward, excitement brightening her eyes. "People who don't appear in photographs. Customers who pay with currency that doesn't exist. Individuals who seem to be traveling to or from places that can't be found on any map. That's very specific. I've been researching this phenomenon for 3 years. I have documented cases of people who entered this gas station and were never seen again, but also cases of people who claim to have worked here but have no employment records, no tax history, no official connection to this business whatsoever. And what's your theory? I believe this location sits on what we might call a dimensional weak point, a place where the barriers between different layers of reality become permeable. The indigenous peoples of this region had stories about such places, locations they considered sacred and dangerous, where the spirit world intersected with the physical realm. She was right, but her understanding was incomplete. The station wasn't just sitting on a weak point. It was actively maintaining one, serving as a kind of customs office for travelers moving between worlds. And the employees weren't victims of the phenomenon. They were part of the infrastructure that made it possible. Dr. Hawthorne, I said carefully, what do you plan to do with this information? Publish my findings. Present them at conferences. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, of reality itself. Think about the implications. If alternate dimensions are accessible through specific geographic locations, the possibilities for scientific advancement are limitless. That's when I understood why she had really come. Not to study the phenomenon, but to exploit it. She saw the station not as a delicate ecosystem that had taken decades to establish, but as a resource to be harvested for academic glory. I need to make a phone call, I said, reaching for the emergency line. Raymond answered immediately. What's the situation? Academic researcher. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne from NU. She knows too much and plans to publicize it. Understood. Keep her there until sunrise. I hung up and turned back to Dr. Hawthorne, who was watching me with growing suspicion. Official policy requires me to contact my supervisor before discussing operational details with outside parties. I explained. He'll be here shortly. What kind of gas station has operational details that requires supervisor approval? The kind that's been operating successfully for 47 years without incident. She began packing up her equipment, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who had learned to recognize danger. I think I have enough information for now. Thank you for your time. Dr. Hawthorne, I really think you should wait for my supervisor. He knows much more about the local history than I do. But she was already heading for the door, her research bag slung over her shoulder and her car keys in hand. I watched through the window as she climbed into her rental car and started the engine. The car wouldn't start. She tried again, pumping the gas pedal and turning the key with increasing desperation. Nothing. The engine didn't even turn over, as if the electrical system had completely failed. Having trouble, I called out, stepping onto the parking lot. It was running fine when I got here, she said, frustration evident in her voice. I just had it serviced yesterday. Desert conditions can be hard on vehicles. Why don't you come back inside while we wait for my supervisor? He knows a lot about cars. She had no choice but to accept the invitation. We sat in uncomfortable silence for the next hour, Dr. Hawthorne occasionally checking her watch and phone, me pretending to read a magazine while actually observing her growing anxiety. Raymond arrived just before dawn, driving the same pickup truck he'd been using since I started working there. He entered the station with his usual calm demeanor, nodding to me before addressing our guest. Dr. Hawthorne, I understand you're conducting research on our little community. Your employee was very helpful, she said cautiously, but I really need to get back to the university. My car seems to be having mechanical problems. Desert air plays havoc with electronics, Raymond said sympathetically, but I think I can help with that. First, though, I'd like to show you something that might interest you as a researcher. He led us outside to the parking lot, where the eastern horizon was beginning to show the first pale light of sunrise. Dr. Hawthorne's rental car sat exactly where she had left it, but now it was covered in a thin layer of dust that looked like it had been accumulating for months. Temporal displacement, Raymond explained conversationally. Your arrival here created a small paradox. You came looking for evidence of dimensional phenomena while already being caught in one. The car exists in a slightly different time stream now, which is why it won't start. That's impossible, Dr. Hawthorne said, but her voice lacked conviction. You've spent 3 years documenting the impossible, and now you're experiencing it firsthand. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? She stared at the dust-covered car, then at the station, then at the empty desert stretching in all directions. For the first time since her arrival, she seemed to understand that she wasn't in control of the situation. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Raymond said. "But the station wants something. It wants to know if you're going to be a problem or if you're going to be part of the solution." "What kind of solution?" "The same kind that Jake here represents. Someone who understands the value of maintaining balance, of protecting something rare and important from those who would destroy it through careless exposure." I watched Dr. Hawthorne struggle with the implications of what she was hearing. Her academic training told her to document and publish, to share knowledge with the scientific community. But her survival instincts were beginning to recognize that some knowledge was too dangerous to spread. "If I agree to keep this quiet," she said slowly, "what happens to my research?" "Your research continues," Raymond said, "but under our guidance, with our protection. There are others like you, scholars who have learned to study the phenomenon without disrupting it. You could join them, contribute to a body of knowledge that serves a higher purpose than academic recognition." "And if I refuse?" Raymond gestured to her car. "Then you'll find yourself increasingly displaced from normal time and space, until eventually you become part of what you came here to study." "It's not a threat, Dr. Hawthorne. It's just how this place works." As the sun crested the horizon, Dr. Hawthorne made her choice. She walked back to her rental car, tried the ignition one more time, and when it started immediately, she sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring at the dashboard. Finally, she got out and approached Raymond. "How do I contact the others?" "The scholars you mentioned." He handed her a business card that looked like it had been printed decades ago. "Dr. Marcus Webb at the University of Nevada. He'll explain the protocols." After she left, Raymond and I stood in the parking lot, watching her taillights disappear into the desert morning. "Will she really keep quiet?" I asked. "She'll try. And if she succeeds, she'll become part of our extended network. Researchers who help us understand what we're protecting. If she fails," he shrugged, "the station will handle it." That evening, as I prepared for my shift, I found myself thinking about Dr. Hawthorne's research, about the indigenous peoples who had recognized this place as sacred and dangerous long before the first gas pump was installed. How many generations of guardians had there been? How many people like Raymond and me, chosen by circumstances that felt random, but were actually part of a much larger pattern? The station was more than just a waypoint for interdimensional travelers. It was a kind of immune system, protecting both worlds from the chaos that would result if the barriers between them collapsed completely. The rules weren't arbitrary restrictions, but carefully developed protocols for maintaining stability in an inherently unstable situation. And the employees weren't victims of the phenomenon. We were antibodies, adapted to function in the space between realities, keeping the traffic flowing smoothly while preventing contamination of either side. As midnight approached and the first customers of the night began to arrive, I took my position behind the counter with something approaching pride. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a calling. And somewhere out there in the desert night, other stations waited at other crossroads, staffed by other guardians who had learned to serve purposes greater than their individual desires. The man in the golden suit arrived at 1:15 a.m., carrying his usual selection of impossible items to the counter. But this time, instead of simply completing the transaction in silence, he paused and looked directly at me. "You're beginning to understand," he said in his whiskey-smooth voice. "That's good. Understanding makes the transition easier." "Transition to what?" He smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like burnished copper. "To whatever comes next. The station chooses its guardians carefully, but it also prepares them for larger responsibilities. Raymond has served well, but he's ready to move on to other duties. And you've proven capable of maintaining the balance. You're offering me Raymond's job? I'm offering you a choice. Continue as you are, serving as night shift guardian for as long as the station requires it, or accept greater responsibilities, overseeing multiple locations, training new guardians, helping to expand the network to serve growing interdimensional traffic. I looked around the store that had become more familiar than any home I'd ever known, at the rules posted behind the counter that had become as natural as breathing, at the desert beyond the windows that held mysteries I was only beginning to comprehend. What happened to the people who came before Raymond? They became what I am now: coordinators, administrators of a larger system that keeps multiple realities functioning smoothly. It's not a job that everyone can handle, but those who can find it rewarding. As he spoke, I could see possibilities stretching out before me like desert highways leading to horizons that existed only in dreams. Other stations, other crossroads, other guardians learning to serve purposes they couldn't yet understand. A network of protectors maintaining the delicate balance between what was and what could be. "I'll think about it," I said. "Of course, but don't think too long. The desert doesn't like to wait, and there are changes coming that will require experienced leadership." After he left, I spent the rest of the night considering my options. I could remain as I was, growing slowly more adapted to the station's needs until I became permanently part of its ecosystem. Or I could accept the larger responsibility, help guide the network's expansion into a world that was becoming increasingly connected and increasingly dangerous. By sunrise, I had made my decision. When Raymond arrived for the day's shift, I handed him my resignation, not from the job, but from my old life. From this point forward, I would serve the station's needs in whatever capacity it required, trusting that the desert knew what it was doing even when I didn't. "Welcome to the next level," Raymond said, shaking my hand with something that might have been relief. "I'll show you the real training manual tonight, the one they don't give to regular employees." As I drove away from Crossroads Station for what I knew would be the last time as a simple night shift worker, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes had taken on a golden tint, and when I smiled, my teeth gleamed like polished metal. The desert had claimed me completely, but instead of loss, I felt only anticipation for what lay ahead. There were other crossroads waiting, other guardians to train, and other mysteries to protect from those who would destroy them through careless exposure. And somewhere in the vast network of stations and highways that connected multiple realities, travelers continued their journeys between worlds, secure in the knowledge that people like me stood watch at the boundaries, ensuring safe passage for all who followed the rules and understood their purpose. The desert had its guardians, and we had our calling. I realized exactly where I belonged,